40,000 people showed up in Boston to march against their KKK protest. Can you talk about what was happening on the front lines there and what it felt like for people to show up in that moment?
When you have someone in one of the highest offices in the world who doesn't condemn white supremacy, and when you have anyone who doesn't condemn white supremacy, you condone it. And so now we're in a situation where white supremacy is something that's being actively condoned in multiple institutions throughout the US, openly. And so when we were on the ground, I remember the night before in Boston, we were thinking 10,000 people were going to show up. And we didn't know that the next day 40,000 people would show up. And so it felt miraculous. I was on this truck at the very head of the march, and I couldn't see the end of it. And that, to me, is a win. Because of that march, 36 openly white supremacist or free speech rallies were shut down. We shed light on a very important situation. But like anything, when you shed light on it, sometimes, well, I suppose the best way to compare it is to a roach infestation. When you shed light on it, they scurry and they run. But you haven't actually dealt with the root cause of why they're there in the first place. And the root cause of that is white supremacy. We are talking about white supremacists, but I want us to get to a point where we're talking about white supremacy itself. One of the other wins that I think that have come out of these moments is what kind of conversations we need to be having, because still I hear, well, we can't make everything about race. Everything is about race. And it means that we actually have to start talking about it, because we can't be more afraid of naming white supremacy than of the implications of white supremacy. And we can't be more afraid of saying the wrong thing than condoning the wrong things. And so these are some of the things that we need to be grappling with now. And these are some of the things that I think have come out of the protest, because we can't still be protesting again and again and again. It's less about the protest now, and it's more about the process that gets us there.
Susan, your work speaks directly to these more institutionalized, lesser obvious ways of racism. Can you talk about when you first recognized in your own life the reality of this more subtle institutional daily prejudice that exists?
So I want to go all the way back to my mother and father coming here, running from the violence and the torches and the hoods of the South, coming here to Los Angeles and settling in a housing project. And it being hard for them, and it being hard for their 6 children. And we enduring the violence, the trauma, the pain of being Black and poor in the projects of America, until I get to the place the day that my 5-year-old son was killed by a LAPD detective. It was an accidental death, but nonetheless, my child, my 5-year-old child, was gone. The policeman never got out of the car. He stopped, but he never got out of the car. And the police department never ever said, "Miss Burton, I'm sorry." And after that, I began to drink. And I drank to the place that I began to use illegal drugs. And I was incarcerated. I was incarcerated over and over again for the next 15 years. I spent a total of 20 years under the authority of the criminal justice system of California's Department of Corrections. And then I found help one day, October 4th, 1997, in a place on Pico Boulevard, about 3 blocks from the beach. And in that place, I began to be nurtured. I got services. I felt safe for the first time in my life, and I began to heal. I got stronger, and I learned to breathe and push. I stayed 100 days. After 6 prison sentences, 100 days in a rehab a couple of blocks from the beach, I began my journey to healing, to power, to forgiveness, to love. And I brought that back to my community, the community of South LA, and started a New Way of Life Reentry Project. And to date, over 1,000 women have been through those homes. Over 300 children have been reunited with their parents.
Bamby, you have your own story of your own self-transformation and healing. Can you talk about how transformation played its part in your journey to becoming an advocate for your community?
One slogan that I always say is, Yo soy un milagro, which means that I am a miracle. You know, I am one who has overcome and who has overturned my horrible experiences. And those same experiences are the same experiences that young, trans, and gender nonconforming, particularly trans women of color, go through on an everyday basis. We are on survival mode every day of our life. Every moment that we wake up, trans women of color, we don't know what's going to happen. You know, we walk with targets on our back, right? And so, you know, homelessness, sex work, prison. I was also a product of the, you know, a prison industrial complex for 14 years of my life, but I have been institutionalized since I was 12. And so, you know, I'm very privileged that I get the opportunity to lead an organization, a national advocacy organization that is really doing great work. We have representation in 10 different states, but we're starting here in Los Angeles, the Center for Violence Prevention and Transgender Wellness. We are the very first trans-led organization that is providing direct social supportive services. We have reentry programs, we have workforce development, we have a drop-in center. Come and have lunch with us. Every day we give lunch to people from 12 to 2. Please come and know who we are. We're not immoral, as someone said earlier, right? We are who we are. We are powerful, and we can make shit happen.
How do we go about fighting for the specific daily needs of our community and still show up for each other?
I started this work, and I started working with Black Lives Matter because I am a Black person. It's no longer the only reason why I do it. I understand that Black liberation has an integral role to play in liberation for all people. And so that means that I can do work for Black Lives Matter and still show up in North Dakota, because I understand that my liberation is tied up with that of Native people. And these are things that we have to do together. My liberation is tied up with Muslim people. My liberation is tied up with immigrants. And so we have to find the interconnectedness, and we have to fight just as ardently for each other as we would for ourselves. And I'll end with this: like art, like books, like films, there's really only two things that matter. There are those things that break the status quo and those things that maintain it. And which one of those things are we going to be?